Okay, let's open this meeting in the usual manner with a moment of silence. And for those who care to join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. My name is Clint, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, Clint. And I'm lucky to be here among people like you whom I love, and you're my friends. And I don't even know some of them, but I guarantee you we are all brought together because of a common bond. That bond is suffering. Throughout our lives, we suffered, and we tried to escape suffering. So one of the things that we did was to change reality. And the way we changed it many times was through drugs or drinking, or sometimes just thinking. And that's what the subject of our 4 sessions is going to be. It's about reality. Because reality ain't what it used to be. You know, we used to be accused of lying. We weren't lying. We were just denying. But first, I got to have a little liturgy here from the Bible. Everybody recognize this? If they don't, this is the modern miracle called Alcoholics Anonymous. If you haven't read this, I strongly suggest that you read it because this book has saved more lives in the last 55 years, actually 50 years, because it wasn't read for 39, than any other book around. I would like to say that about this book, but unfortunately people are killing each other all over the world because of religion. And it's not the book that causes it, it's the reality or their interpretation of what's in this book. And fortunately, a couple of men got together in Toledo, Ohio, 1935, and they changed reality. They changed reality for me, and yet I was just 2 years old at the time, because they gave me a new reality that saved my life. Now, this is our 5th session of this. Father Torres did the first 2, and I did one at Eureka Springs, and I did one up here last year, and I discovered that doing 4 sessions is just awfully hard. I'm getting old. I'm tired. So I asked a friend, Don Gold, who has a master's degree in social work.
That and a quarter, you can get a cup of coffee.
Don is a former millionaire. And he's one of us. He is a 12-step person. And I have been fortunate enough to know Don over the past 5 years. And I tell you, it's a blessing in my life because he is one that has accepted the reality of life. That reality is today, not yesterday or tomorrow, but today. You see, the 2 biggest thieves in the world are not in the penitentiary. They're in your mind. Yesterday, I wish it was last Saturday. I wish it was last year. Tomorrow, I can't wait till next Friday night. I can't wait until I go on vacation. I can't wait until I get over this hill. Those thieves stole the greatest thing in the world from me, and that is today, right now. And I was unable to grasp that until the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous and people like you showed me. I was living in denial. I couldn't accept the reality that the majority of you accepted. So this has changed my life dramatically. I'm glad. Because first of all, I wouldn't be alive. But secondly, I can live a life of peace now. Where used to, I woke up every morning, and the minute I opened my eyes, I was sorry that I woke up. I wished that I could stay asleep. Because anxiety immediately leapt into my heart. And it wasn't fear so much, because fear you can do something about. You can put your finger on fear. But you see, anxiety just doesn't quite come together. It's a feeling of impending doom. And I lived with this until 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon on weekdays, until I could get that first dream. Or on Saturday mornings, 9 or 10 o'clock. Of course, I used to go around bragging about I was not a morning drinker. But every Saturday and Sunday morning, I was drinking. Or if I went to a football game, or fishing trip, or baseball game, or hunting trip, or whatever, I drank every morning. So really, I wasn't lying. I was just denying. Because, see, I was changing reality to fit my thinking. Now, we're all here for a wonderful purpose, and that is because we're seeking, we're searching for a greater spiritual life, a greater spiritual program. If not, you wouldn't be here, because you had to pay to come up here. I'm up here, I'm not making any money out of this. It does help my ego, I need that occasionally. But the great thing is I get to share my views about staying sober. And some of us went over here and heard Vespers, and the monks, they sing the Psalms, for those of you who are not Catholics. That's the Psalms that they sing. They're all Psalms. And the 40th Psalm is one of the most beautiful Psalms in the world. I'll read that to you in a minute. But first, I got to read the liturgy from the Blue Book. And the first thing I want to read is about alcoholism, and it's out of chapter 3 called More on Alcoholism. And for any of you people that have ever had a slip, and you don't know why you've had a slip, or you have friends that have slips, and they don't know why they have slips, this tells why. It's on page 35. It says, our first example is a friend we should call Jim. This man had a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He's a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for his nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. He made a beginning. His family was reassembled, and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Okay, there's so much hidden in that little sentence right there, because that's the secret of staying sober. Half measures avail us nothing. See, if we just do half, and that's what we alcoholics and Al-Anon, well, maybe not the Al-Anon so much, but we alcoholics, we're always trying to circumvent. We're trying to shortcut. So half measures avail us nothing. That's what this is saying. Hey, we have to enlarge our spiritual life. And that's what we're here about. And that's wonderful because, see, we have a chance failed to enlarge his spiritual life. To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. Yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. And he went on. And that's it. Isn't that wonderful? See, there's the secret of staying sober. So we don't have to slip. We have to enlarge our spiritual life. And I promise you, those of us here have a good chance of staying sober the rest of this day. Now in chapter 4, I skipped this chapter when I first came into AA. I read the important things like how it works. You know, I wanted to get right to the message. I read the message, the chapter to wives, you know, like that pertained to me. But I skipped this We Agnostics chapter because I didn't feel I was an agnostic any longer. I had converted the night before I came to AA. I did. And this is what it says. Hey, this is the word of Bill Wilson. This is the word of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the word of the first 100. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we've made it clear the distinction between the alcoholic and non-alcoholic. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably an alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. It didn't say stop drinking. As a matter of fact, in the first 164 pages of this book, which is the Alcoholics Anonymous book on how to get sober, it does not tell you one time to not drink. It gives you 12 simple steps that are hard as hell. There's nothing easy about them, but they're simple. So only a spiritual experience will conquer our problem. And then it goes on the next page to tell us about our dilemma. This is our reality. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power with which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously. But where and how will we define this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. That's what it says, that sentence. Isn't that wonderful? The last sentence in chapter 4 is marvelous. People say, how do you find God? I keep praying, and I keep asking people, and I can't find God. I look for him in churches. I look for him everywhere. In books, friends. And it tells us right here in this big book where we can find God. The last sentence in chapter 4 says, when we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. See, we had to change our attitudes. We had to change the reality in our life, the reality of being selfish and self-centered, to where we were willing to accept a power greater than ourselves in our life. This is the reality that Bill Wilson and Bob Smith brought us. A power greater than ourselves, that we could choose. A power of our understanding. Not a Catholic God, not a Baptist God, not a Jewish God, or Episcopal, but a God of our understanding. One of the great Catholic cardinals of the Church, Catholic Church, he said one of I could no more use your God than you could see through my eyes. That means that we all have to have our own understanding of God. That's what this book is about. Regardless of what that understanding is, anything is a good beginning. So I really enjoyed this book because, you see, I came from the other side of the tracks. I was an agnostic. I was a super agnostic. I used to think anyone that was religious was crazy. I thought they were weak. See, that was my reality. And the reason is because I guess I thought I was God. And it tells us in chapter 5, the first thing we have to do, doesn't say quit drinking. It says the first thing we have to do is quit playing God. That's in chapter 5, this blue book. It says that's the art of triumph that we go through. That's the way it is. We have to first quit playing God. And that way AA helped me to discover a God of my reality, of my understanding, that has given me the peace of today and the hope of tomorrow. Now I mentioned about the Psalm, the 40th Psalm. I'm going to read from the other big book now. It tells us, this is a prayer of gratitude and help. It says, I have waited for the Lord. I remember back in my drinking days, I used to wish there was a God. It says, I have waited for the Lord. And he stooped toward me and heard my cry. See, that's what we're talking about. I had to get my heart in the right place. I had to draw near to God before he would stoop and help me. As long as I thought I was God, there's no need for him to come into my life. And there it tells us, I have waited for the Lord, and he stooped toward me and heard my cry. He drew me out of the pit of destruction. Hey, that's where I was. I lived in the garbage can of life, and I had every opportunity in the world. I wasn't rich and famous, but I thought I was. I had racehorses, same wife, lived in the middle of 200 acres, 2 automobiles. Hey, I was full of piss and vinegar. He set my feet up on a crag. See, I'd been living in this swamp. My feet were unsteady. I sank everywhere I went. I could always make a good start, but something would happen and I'd go underwater. He made firm my steps. See, used to the anxiety and the fear ate me up. And I was afraid to go forward. But God gave me the strength and gave me the courage and the firmness of my step. And he put a new song into my mouth. See, I was like Paul. I persecuted God. I guess I was jealous because I wanted to be God so bad. I put him down every time I could. I lived the life of a super agnostic, I told you. But God finally came into my life when I opened my heart just a little. And he put this new song in my mouth. And it's a hymn to God. Many shall look on in awe and trust in the Lord. That's a powerful song because it's written for alcoholics. There's a lot of alcoholism in this book, by the way. We've talked about it in our other retreats. Here's a nun from Fort Smith, Macrina Whitaker, writes beautiful poetry, and I want to read one of her poems. We read this last year. It's a song for winter. Winter, season of resting, season of silence, season of waiting and deepening. Abundant life in the depths of the earth, abundant life in the depths of our beings. Life, waiting. Winter is life, waiting. Life waiting with its secrets and its mystery. Life not trying to understand anything. Life not trying to accomplish anything. Winter is life being quiet. It is true, a few winter storms may rage around your window, drawing you momentarily from your quiet. Even these can serve to draw you deeper to the center. When the cold out there awakens you, pull your cloak around you. It's okay to go inside and wait. Enter the sanctuary, into your depths of underneath your thoughts, deep down under your words. Go down into the silence of the earth, down there where the secrets are. If you go deep enough, someday you will come out again, bringing the secrets with you. This is a season not to worry about the harvest. Forget the planting, plowing, gathering. Now's the time for waiting, centering, being, deepening. This is the liturgy of deepening. Let go of everything. Don't even listen. Just fall into the depths like a seed. Surrender. Let God have you. Fall into God and wait. If you fall deep enough, you won't hear the winter storms raging at your door. You will be down under with God, learning the secrets in silence, learning without knowing you are learning. How much power. One of my favorite scriptures in the Bible is from the Hebrew text. We call it the Old Testament in the Christian church. It's from the Song of Songs, the Song of Solomon. And it's the second half of the second chapter. And for a long time I had a great misunderstanding of this. But I read a story one time about it. It really challenged my thinking. And it said what this is telling us is that this is Jesus on the cross. And that God is telling him in his last moments of life, his last breath that he took, this is what God said to Jesus. And I read it, and I read it, and the more I read it, the more I think that that's okay, but it sounds more like he's talking to me. Because it tells about how I was hard to find. God had a hard time finding me because I was hiding under rocks. You see, I was the prodigal son out on my own. Listen to these words with magnificence. Hark, my lover, here he comes, springing across the mountain, leaping across the hills. My lover's like a gazelle or a young stag. Here he stands behind our wall, gazing through the window, peering through the lattices. My lover speaks, he says to me, arise, my beloved, my beautiful one, and come. Isn't that wonderful to think that the last breath you take, you're going to hear God say, arise, Clint, my beautiful one, and come. For see, the winter is past. The rains are over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of pruning the vines has come, and the song of the dove is heard in our land. The fig tree puts forth its figs, and the vines in bloom give forth fragrance. Arise, my beloved, and come. O my dove, in the cleft of the rocks, in the secret recesses of the cliff, let me hear from you. See, here's God saying, hey, don't hide from me. Come on, let me hear from you. Let me hear your sweet voice. For your voice is sweet and you are lovely. Catch us, the little foxes that damage the vineyard. For our vineyards are in bloom. My lover belongs to me, and I to him. He browses among the lilies until the day breathes cool, and the shadows lengthen. Roam, my lover, like a gazelle or a young stag upon the mountains of Lebanon. It means a lot to me. I really like it. Here's a Sanskrit proverb that we hear a lot, and I like to read it. What is it we say about repetition? Confirmed and strengthens faith. Confirmed and strengthens habit, and faith becomes natural. Look to this day for its life. The very life of life. In its brief course lie all the realities, that's what our subject is, all the realities and verities of existence. The bliss of growth, the splendor of action, the glory of power. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today well lived makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. I want to read you from the Christian scripture of Luke, chapter 15. It's called the Prodigal Son. We've talked about him many times, and the reason I like to talk about the prodigal son is because he surely was an alcoholic. There ain't much doubt about it. Jesus said to them, a man had two sons. The younger then said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that's coming to me. So the father divided up the property. Some days later, this younger son collected all his belongings and went off to a distant land, where he squandered his money on dissolute living. Other Christian scriptures call that riotous living. By the way, riotous is the word that we use that comes from the Blue Book Bible. And I like that. After he had spent everything, a great famine broke out in the country, and he was in dire need. So he attached himself to one of the property class of the place and sent him to a farm to take care of the pigs. Now, we don't think anything about that because we're Razorbacks, most of us. But you got to remember that this boy was a Jew. He was an Orthodox Jew. And for him to fool around with pigs was really the bottom of the barrel. So that's what it's telling us there. He was at the bottom of the barrel. And he began to think, so it says he longed to fill his belly with the husks that were fodder for the pigs, but no one made a move to give him anything. Coming to his senses at last, and that is probably one of the most important sentences in this whole book. Coming to his senses at last. You see, that's telling us, it tells me, and I firmly believe this, that anyone that does not believe in God or believe in a higher power is not right in his mind. I think that, insanity that's a word, comes from the Latin word sanitas, which means whole. Well, to be not whole, insane, means that you have a little sliver out of that ball or pie. Or you can have a great big piece like I had, But anyway, I think anyone that doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in a higher power, that they're not whole. They're not sane. I'm not talking about being crazy. I'm talking about being not whole. And this sentence tells us, it says, coming to his senses at last. That was it when I came to AA. I finally came to my senses. He said, how many hired hands at my father's place have more than enough to eat while I am here starving? I will break away and return to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against God and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. treat me like one of your hired hands. With that, he set off for his father's house. While he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and was deeply moved. See, his father had been looking for him all this time. He hadn't turned him back. He didn't tell him not to go. He ran out to meet him. Now, this is very important because in the Jewish society of that day, father would not have left and ran out to meet the son. He would have waited there. The son would have had to come up and apologize, all these things. But the father ran out, met him, and he threw his arms around his neck and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against God and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. The father said to his servants, Quick, bring out the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. That doesn't mean much to us, except you got to remember the ring on his finger. That's the way they did business back in those days. The seal. Everything they did, they put their seal on. So this says, I trust you. You can do business in my name. Your home. All is forgiven. Take the fatted calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. And that's the way it was with me and Ahab. I had been living the life of a dead person. I may as well have been dead. But I came back to life when I came through these doors. It says he was lost and is found. Then the celebration began. Meanwhile, this is the first Al-Anon in life. Meanwhile, the elder son was out on the land. As he neared the house on his way home, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked him the reason for the dancing and music. The servant answered, Your brother's home, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back in good health. The son grew angry at this and would not go in, but his father came out and began to plead with him. He said to his father in reply, For years now I've slaved for you. I never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me so much as a kid goat to celebrate with my friends. Then when this son of yours returns after having gone through your property with loose women, you kill the fatted calf for him. My son, replied the father, You're with me always, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice. This brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found. And that's something that's powerful. That's the way we are. We were dead. We were lost. But now we're found. We're talking about reality tonight and over the next 2 days. And I want to give you 3 different versions of this particular story. And you choose the reality, and that's the way we do in life. We choose our own reality. The second prodigal son story. Now, don't let me, this is just an idea that I have. So if you don't agree with this, this is okay. I'm not trying to shake your faith or tell you what I'm saying is true or anything. I'm just maybe trying to challenge your thinking or whatever. Because it's not in the big book. If it ain't in the big book, you don't have to pay any attention to it. The second version of the story of the prodigal son, I relate that the 2 sons were 2 angels. And this one angel went to God and he says, I want my inheritance. And that inheritance is to become human. And the reason is so that you can make your own decisions. A human being can make their own decisions. See, the sons of God, the angels, they can't make their own decisions. God makes them for them. So the epitome of being a child of God is to be a human being, where we can make our own decisions. And many of us run around, especially me. See, I never was at my senses. I never came to my senses like the prodigal son. And that's the way this angel wanted it. He wanted to go out and make his own decisions. And he did. And he made mistakes. That's why they put erasers on pencils. That's why God forgives. There's a story about a pope one time. He went to a confessional by himself and he was praying to God and he says, you remember back several years ago when I committed that sin? And, and God says, no, I don't remember. That's the way it is with God and our sins. He doesn't even remember. He forgets whatever sin is. But anyway, this angel went out and he lived the life of a human being. And he came to see that, hey, wait a minute. I want to be back with God. So he said, hey, I'm returning to heaven. And he went back to God and he says, I didn't want to be a human being, really. I just thought I did. And I'm glad to be back. I was lost, but now I'm back. And then the other angel got resentful because this other angel that had been out got to go out and do all these things that he hadn't. So this showed you that, hey, even angels make mistakes. There's only one God. And today, I am not him. Yeah, that's a big one. There's only one God. And today, I am not him. The third version of the prodigal son is where the two sons are actually two personalities. Not two separate people, but one person with two personalities. The dark side and the light side. And you see, all of us have the dark side and the light side. Everyone in this room has lived in the dark side. And now, fortunately, we've been able to cross over to the light side. But we go back and forth. It would be nice if we could stay on the light side. But we can't. And that's why God is there. That's why God is there for us, because we're human beings. We make mistakes. Remember the eraser. That's why God is there. He is our eraser. He is the reality for us that forgives us and forgets. The two personalities and the one person are so interesting to me because you see, I continue to vacillate back and forth between both sides. I have my bad moments. I have my dark side. But fortunately, the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous and friends and loved ones like you bring me back to the right side, the light side. And that's what this fellowship is all about. It's not to chastise, but to love. And I have been loved to the light side from the dark side. You know, when we come to Alcoholics Anonymous, we don't come here because we're bad. We come here because we're sick. And we don't come here to get good. We come here to get well. And that's the difference. That's the light side and the dark side. none of us are bad people. We're all good people. It's just that we have some bad actions. We're all lovable, and we are all loved, even if it's only God that loves us. But that's the most important thing. It's like that scripture I read from the Song of Solomon. God loves us. The minute we die, the minute we take our last breath, we hear him say, "Come, my beloved, arise, come home." Are there any questions? Why don't we close in the usual manner? And I'd like to tell you a story about this Lord's Prayer before we say it. Alcoholics Anonymous started in 1935, and about the same time in Little Rock, Arkansas, a guy named Sterling Cockrell got sober. And there were about 6 guys that slipped around. They had a hard time staying sober, but they finally made it. After Sterling Cockrell had been sober about 4 years, he read about the big book, and he sent off for a copy of it, or not Sterling, but what was his name? The car salesman.
Harlan Nickel.
Yeah, Harlan Nickel. And what was funny is by the time it got there and it was COD, he didn't have the money to pay for it, so they sent it back. And by the way, we have that letter now in the archives in Little Rock about that book being sent back, that original big book. And it tells that it was sent COD and returned. And the reason is because he was drunk at the time. But anyway, Harlan Nickel did sober up and became very active in AA, and he was an inspiration to me. I loved him. He was sober over 40 years before he died. But he was telling me the story about the Lord's Prayer. They had these 6 guys, and they were having a meeting, and they came to the kind of the end of it, and they said, "Well, what do we do now?" This one guy said, "Well, why don't we do like Jesus did? And let's say the Lord's Prayer." So this is something that's fascinating about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. The first time the Lord's Prayer was said in an AA meeting, which is traditional, was in Little Rock, Arkansas, back in about 1939. Little Rock, Arkansas is famous in AA because we were the 10th chapter in Alcoholics Anonymous in the world. We were the first chapter to be formed by correspondence, and the first chapter to be formed that Bill Wilson didn't personally start. And it was started by Sterling Cockrell, and many of you know his son, Sterling Jr. He has 2 granddaughters that are in AA in Little Rock, Arkansas. It's a pleasure to know them, knowing that the bloodline still is alive. So why don't we join hands and, like one of the first AA meetings, say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, and power, and the glory forever. Amen. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. Good job. Good job.
Each other and doing an awful lot of misunderstanding.
Let's open this up in the usual manner with a moment of silent meditation following each round of prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage change things I can, and the wisdom to know others. My name's Clint, I'm an alcoholic. Good morning, it's great to be with everyone again. I'm going to make a couple announcements, and then I'm going to turn the meeting over to Don. These announcements are 12:45, anyone that wants to make a guided tour of the facility up here, they'll have someone meet you right out here in the vestibule at 12:45. And it's very interesting if you've never taken it. They go through the church and everywhere and tell you about all the windows and what they mean. And it's really kind of fun. Then for anyone that might want to go to confession, at 4 o'clock in room 316 here in this building, there will be a priest, and you can go to confession at 4 o'clock this afternoon. There are several that need maybe to hear this, so Don's going to make this announcement again at the end of the meeting. Thank you. Don?
Okay. My name's Don, I'm an alcoholic. And I don't really know what I'm doing here, but I'm glad I am. Glad I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of this. Some of you may have gotten the impression from the literature I left out last night that this is going to be a philosophical lecture. And that's not what it's going to be, so everybody relax. I would prefer that it's not going to be a lecture. And what I mean by that is that I would prefer that you all jump in when you hear something you agree with or don't agree with, and that we have a discussion. But if it doesn't go that way, and you all decide not to jump in, then I will tell you about the information that I brought and give you some of my opinions in this first session. And then when we have the second session tonight, we'll do it kind of like an AA meeting. And we'll just sit in a round circle, and you all can throw in the subjects that you want to, and if you don't, then I'll throw one in and we'll kick that around. But by hook or crook, we're going to find out what you all think about reality from a secular and, if you want, from a spiritual point of view. So the point is that feel free to do it now. You know? If you hear something that rings a bell with you or hacks you off, say, "Oh, caca, I don't agree with that," you know, and let's kick it around now. And that way, if I don't get to the end of all of this in the first session, why, we'll just pick up with some more of that in the second session. But I really do want to hear what you all think about this stuff. So this is anything but a lecture. Let me say that as a starting point, I have been active in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and in personal recovery for just a little over 6 years. And I always like to say that the first 18 months that I was in the program, I couldn't speak in complete sentences. And that is essentially true. Gloria, I'm sure, remembers that because she's only about 6 or 7 or 8 months ahead of me in this program, and she couldn't speak in complete sentences either.
For a lot longer than that.
And I'm sitting at a meeting at Wolf Street, and this is early on, like this is in the first couple of months. And the woman who was chairing this was somebody who I knew. She had been a customer of mine when I had been in the retail business, and she was chairing a meeting. And, a little ways into the meeting, she called on me. The subject was reality. And she called on me to tell what I thought reality was. And, my heart just absolutely leapt up into my throat, And what I sputtered out was, well, I haven't been here very long, and I don't have any idea what reality is, but I kind of suspect that if I stay here long enough, I may get a little better idea of what it is. And it turns out that that's pretty much what happened to me. Now, that's not to say that I know what reality is today or that I think I know what reality is today, because I don't. But I have a little better idea today of what I think it is today, and that's not the same thing that it was 5 years ago, and it's probably not the same thing that it's going to be a few years from now either. But I have a better idea of what I think it is, and more importantly than that, I have a little better idea of what I don't think it is. And this type of thing can get very philosophical, and you can get into some really deep stuff about reality. But here's the bottom line. If you want to hear it, and then, go walk around outside, that's fine, because you won't miss anything after I tell you this. Reality, this is my opinion from what I have been exposed to. Reality is whatever you think it is. That's what reality is. Each and every one of us have our own individual reality. We were having a discussion over at Clint and Cynthia's right before Christmas about this, and Clint said, this very interesting analogy. Clint said, well, if a person is colorblind, we know that there are colors out here. Joe has a purple shirt on, and Joe has a purple shirt on. Okay? Joe, is that a purple shirt?
I believe so.
He has a purple shirt on.
Whatever that is.
And Clint said, if I am colorblind and I can't see the color of Joe's shirt, he still has a purple shirt on. Yeah, that's one way to look at it. That's one way to look at reality. But I tell you what, if I'm colorblind and all I can see is in black and white and shades of gray, you can tell me all damn day long that Joe has a purple shirt on, and I'm going to tell you, no, he doesn't. He has a medium gray shirt on. That is my reality. And it doesn't make any difference what the laws of nature and science are when it comes through this set of eyes and this set of ears and this mind, and it's filtered through this alcoholic mind. It comes back to a place in there that is my reality. Well, if we all tried to practice that, as you know, we would have absolute chaos. And so, as you know, we have organized into societies and cultures and whatnot. But still, I have discovered that the different ways that we have organized have defined reality in different cultures and in different understandings of it. So, when you talk to an Oriental or an Asian about reality, you're going to get a different answer than if you talk to a Western European about reality. And so on and so forth. And that really is what my secular approach to this subject is about. But there's a goal that I have in mind to reach at the end of it, which is you make this wide circle through all the peoples and all the cultures and all the philosophies, trying to find out what reality is. And you find out that your own individual reality is what reality is. And then, Cynthia brought up Joseph Campbell last night, and one of the things that he used to talk about that I found so fascinating was the similarities in what we tend to think of as different religions. I remember a discussion he made one time about Shinto, which is the Japanese religion, and basically showed through their symbols and through their rhetoric and through their literature the story of the Garden of Eden. And he just pointed it right out, and you could see it all right there. Well, see, what I believe is that regardless of what our individual conception of reality is, our cultural and our societal conception of reality is, in the end, it all comes back to the basic driving force, And that is the spirituality that Clint has been talking about. And that has been my own experience. I spent the first half of my life, or what I certainly hope is going to be the first half of my life, in pursuit of what you would call, looking back at it now, what you would call the pursuit of materialism. And I was real good at materialism. And I accumulated a lot of materials. And I figured that I had what everybody else wanted. And in the end, it let me down. It let me down real hard and real fast because it was materialism for me was an empty goal. And so I ended up giving a lot of the materials back. And that was what it took for me to be happy. And I ended up being one of those people who used to just absolutely abhor. I am not what you would call a religious person, but I'll use that word to kind of describe the kind of person I'm talking about. One of these religious, born-again people. You know the type, you know, with the stars in their eyes, you know. But after I saw the things I saw and experienced the things I experienced, I became one of those too, more or less. And I really like it. I like it a lot. And today that's my reality. Well, anyway, it's kind of interesting. My wife and I were watching one of our favorite shows a couple of weeks ago. That's My Dog. And they had this segment, you know, they bring 3 judges up, you know, to judge what the dogs are going to do on the show. And they brought this guy up along with 2 other judges. And the moderator goes through this little thing where he, for a minute or two, you know, he talks to each of the judges. Tell us a little bit about yourself, you know. And so they did that. And the first dog went through its routine, and the judges scored it. And, you know, normally a judge gives a 7 or an 8 or a 9 out of 10, you know, for the dog who's done his thing. And this first judge pops up a 3. And so the moderator says, why such a low score? And this guy answers on television, on That's My Dog, he says, well, I really don't like dogs. And the moderator says, well, it's a fine time to tell us. Well, I really have never been much for organized religion. And here I am. Okay? So it's the same kind of thing. I don't have anything against organized religion. I just have never been comfortable there. I was raised in a formal religion. I was raised in the Jewish religion. And I went to Sunday school, and I was confirmed, and I never went back. Clint is still trying to get me to go back. He says that I need to experience my religion in sobriety, and I know you're right. And one of these days, I'm going to do that. But the best way I know to describe to you where I'm at about that is this. I am not a non-religious person. I have very great respect for all religions, individually and collectively. And I have very great respect for the religion I was raised in. But I am a spiritual person by far. When I was 4 months sober, I was laying up in the hospital having a double hernia operation. It's the only surgery I've ever had in my life. And I was newly sober, you know, and remember now I can't speak in complete sentences. And the rabbi comes into my room. I never met this man because the rabbi that I knew when my kids went to Sunday school had moved on to another town, and this was the new guy who had just been here. He'd only been here 3 years, and I had never met him. And so he came in and introduced himself to me, and as was normal with me at that time, and as I still do now, in 25 words or less, my life story just came plundering out at him, you know. Da 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 da. But for the last 4 months, I've been in the AA program trying to recover. And I'm sorry I haven't ever met you before, and I'm sorry I haven't been up there to go to services and whatnot, but for the last 4 months, I've been going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said to me, and I quote, "Then you are getting it there." And that is a treasure that I carry with me. He understands. He's not an alcoholic. As a matter of fact, about a year later, Clint convinced me to go up to the temple and offer my services as a recovering alcoholic to the rabbi in the congregation. And so I did that. I didn't want to do that, but I did that. And I ended up telling him my story there in the rabbi's study. And 2 or 3 months later, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the telephone rings. And he says, "Don, it's Rabbi Levy." He said, "I just got a call from a Jewish fellow who lives in Arkadelphia, and he has gotten into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he wants to do his 5th step with me." And he said, "Don, what's a 5th step?" And I said, "I'll be right there." And I got to go over and sit with the rabbi and explain in brief the 12 steps to him and the 4th and 5th step process. And after that was over with, he said to me, "You know, it doesn't make any difference to me whether you come up here to services or not." He said, "You just send me who you need to send me, and I'll send you who I need to send you." And so now, once in a while, maybe once or twice a year, here comes a telephone call from somebody the rabbi said to call, maybe you could help. And that's the open line of communication that we have. And he's real satisfied with that, and right now, today, I'm real satisfied with that. Who knows, you know, maybe I'll get back into it again someday. I don't know. I certainly find all religion and the history of their growths and whatnot very interesting. But what I have found out in studying this subject of reality is that there has always been this basic division, I think, between spiritual or religious approaches to truth and factual approaches to truth. And this goes all the way back. This goes back to Aristotle and Plato and all of that stuff. One of the handouts last night was about metaphysics. And there's just 1 or 2 things out of that that I want to read to you that bring this point home. Metaphysics is that area of philosophy which concerns itself with the nature and structure of reality. It deals with such questions as, are the objects we perceive real or illusionary? Does the external world exist apart from our consciousness of it? Is reality ultimately reducible to a single underlying substance? If so, is it essentially spiritual or material? Is the universe intelligible and orderly, or incomprehensible and chaotic? In its traditional meaning, metaphysics is almost synonymous with ontology, the study of being as such. But it also includes cosmology, the study of organization and origin of the universe. At times during the history of philosophy, theology, the study of the nature and existence of God, has been included in metaphysics, but modern philosophers tend to treat it as a separate subject. Isn't that convenient? They have removed theology from the science of metaphysics. Why do you suppose that they have done that? Because they can't figure it out, because it doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't reduce to a single underlying substance, and therefore it's not reality. Well, I don't buy that, and I kind of suspect that most of you all don't buy that either. The term metaphysics itself was introduced by early editors of the works of Aristotle to describe those writings that came after and thus carried analysis beyond his studies on physics. And I call that the old expression, yeah, but. You know about yeah, but. You know, you hear all of this stuff, and it all gets presented to you, and then you get to the end, and you got to say, yeah, but, because this lies outside the sphere of that. And so it went with theology. Very interesting. Just a little more of this. Metaphysics began with the pre-Socratic philosophers who were concerned with whether reality was reducible to a single underlying substance. The Malaysian school took a monist position on this question. Their ideas about what constituted the basic substance varied from water to fire to the one. Then there was posited a dualistic or two-substance theory about the world. And that's very interesting. Dualism, which is very popular today, is the theory that every action causes a reaction. All right? Everything happens in twos. If this is an event, then this is a responding event. All right? Yeah, but you run into a problem about, for example, from Rabbi Kirshner's works, why do bad things happen to good people? See? Yeah, but that doesn't fall into you do this, you do good works, and you get good works back. And so it belies the dualistic approach. Well, you may be getting the idea that the fly in the ointment here is all of these darn yeah buts. They keep popping up all the time. And what I have learned to fall back on for those is spirituality. It fits very conveniently. Here's another completely different approach that I find absolutely fascinating. In recent years, many philosophers have come to believe that only the natural sciences can legitimately investigate the nature of reality. I ain't going to buy that. Hence, for many contemporary philosophers, the proper philosophical endeavor is the analysis of language. Now, there's a very, very big school that says that reality as we understand it, we being those of us in this Western culture of ours, reality as we understand it is based in our language. This is something that has taken on a lot of study in the last probably 100 years, I guess. You know, you can trace this stuff from ridiculous origins. You know, you can go back to the cave people when they were using grunts and groans, and they had a grunt for this and a groan for that. And the guys with the slanty eyes had different sounding grunts and groans. And the guys in Africa with the black skin had another set of grunts and groans. And all of that stuff, those grunts and groans, grew up into language. And language took on meaning. And the meaning of language became reality. But, yeah, but, and here's the yeah, but. In language, regardless of where it comes from, whether you believe the story of the Tower of Babel, you know, which is fine by me, you know, it's as good as any of them as to where languages came from, to the evolution of man and culture and the founding of language that way, or any place in between that you might happen to choose to believe in. The fact of the matter is that every language has its own words and sounds. Let me give you an example. This is almost a language example, but a little easier one might be an article. When I was a kid, a bagel, which is a round piece of bread with a hole in the middle, that has been a Jewish recipe from Western Europe for several hundred years. Nobody knew what bagels were. And this is not that long ago. You know, this is 40 years ago. You know, the only people who knew what bagels were the people who lived near large concentrations of Jews, like up around in New York, where there were delicatessens and whatnot. Well, today, you know, they got bagels at McDonald's, all right? And it has been an amazing thing to me how bagels have become a reality in the secular world outside the Jewish community. Today, everybody knows what a bagel is. Most of you all have probably tried one. Well, there is nothing that is quite like a bagel. It's bread, okay, so it's got flour and yeast and all that stuff in it. But you know, if you mix up the flour and the yeast and all that stuff one way, you get white sliced bread. And you mix it up another way, you get whole wheat. You mix it up another way, you get Kaiser rolls. Well, a bagel is not white sliced bread, and a bagel is not whole wheat bread, and it's not a Kaiser roll. A bagel is a bagel. It's a bagel, you know, there's nothing else. My parents used to speak a little bit of Yiddish. Their parents, one set, my grandparents from Russia on my father's side, didn't speak English. They only spoke Yiddish. And so my parents used to converse a little bit in Yiddish before we moved south. They had a community that spoke Yiddish in those days, and they haven't been around that community in many years now, so they don't do it anymore. They used to say certain words, and I used to say, what does that mean? And I can remember my mother standing there and saying, well, it doesn't really translate. There's not really a word for it in American. Well, let me tell you what. So it goes that way in every language. This is a little book that my brilliant boss, and I really mean that, loaned to me to look into this subject. It's called They Have a Word for It. And what this is this is a collection of words from the various and sundry many languages around the world that do not translate into English. We don't have an English word for it. Now the point I'm trying to make to you all is, if somebody else has a word for something, and we don't have a word for it in this language, then this tends, in their language, to be a part of their reality. And it is not a part of our reality in our language. I'm just going to open this book to any place. I don't have it marked anywhere. And just read you some stuff. Here's a German word. I can't read it. Gedankenexperiment. German. It's a thought experiment. We don't have a word in English for a thought experiment. We have a word for a thought. We have a word for an experiment. But a thought experiment? I mean, how many times do you sit back to do an experiment in thinking, you know? Here's a word in Indonesian, halak, which is a dream guide. What's a dream guide, you know? I mean, I'm not going to read all this to you, but believe me. Here's one, dharma, which is from Sanskrit. Each person's unique, ideal path in life and knowledge of how to find it. All that in one word, dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A. Here's one in Italian. Qualunquismo. Attitude of indifference to political and social issues.
We'll call that redneck.
Obviously, that's a part of your reality. Very good. And so it goes. So now we're starting to find out that the language that we speak has an awful lot to do with our reality. The culture that we live in has an awful lot to do with the language that we speak. And here we are at the end of a long hand-me-down process that has been passed on to us. And we have that today, and we may or may not have ever wanted it, but we've got it. So what? Well, what it means is that the reality that I'm walking around with today is one that I did not necessarily choose, but it is one that I inherited. The big news is that I don't have to stick with that if it's not comfortable for me or if I don't want to, because reality is whatever you think it is, up to a certain point. But beyond that certain point, there are some boundaries to our reality. I don't know if the boundaries for you all are the same as the boundaries for me. But I reach a certain point in time where there are too many unanswered questions. And I have to find my reality in my spiritual connection. And that's different for all the different religions, and it's different for all the individual people that are in the individual religions. But you have a lot of choices of reality. This is not to be confused with society. Society is made up of laws. You don't have a lot of choices with regards to law. But we've all agreed on those laws. And the ones that don't agree are in prison. And but those laws are not necessarily reality. They are an agreed upon common ground. And if you're like me, too often, you start to accept those laws of society as reality. I would submit to you that in nations and cultures where religion is not separated from state, that you do not have anywhere near the degree of choice in reality that we have, because our religion is our own personal business. Up to a point. You can't do like the three Satanists in West Memphis did, and go kill 3 little children in the name of religion, because there are laws that intervene. But within certain reason, reality is whatever we want it to be. A couple of things I want to read to you. This is written by Dr. Ruth Zier, who is my boss. A couple of things about language, and then I'll get away from language, that I think are very interesting. Does anybody want to say anything yet at this point? Because you will later. Okay. Or else we'll sit here and look at each other. Maybe we will.
I know it's kind of a question, it's kind of just a thought that's been there since you brought this up. And it's just that I'm trying to keep, every time you use the word reality, the word truth keeps coming up. And I'm kind of trying to figure out how those two exist together, or do that.
That's a really good question. The search for truth, in quotation marks, is essentially what got philosophy started in the first place. I think, and this is not me saying this is what I glean from these writings. It seems to me that everybody started out on their knees, praying to whatever it was that they were afraid of. Fire, the forces of nature, thunderstorms, disease, whatever it was. And Joe McQuaney, who was quoted last night, tells a story about free will, which man has free will. And he tells the story this way, which makes it very understandable to me. He said, and somebody said this last night as a matter of fact, animals, for example, do not have free will. Like, for example, in sex and reproduction. They don't decide when to do sex and reproduce. It's an instinctual thing, and it happens at a certain season. There are some things that are left to chance, like whether, two members of the opposite sex of the same species are in the same place at the same time at the right time. That's a matter of chance of nature. But the time is determined by instinct, so there's a lack of free will. And Joe McQuaney tells the story that God gave man free will to decide these things, to decide when and how much. And therein lies the problem, because we have taken that free will and we have made the judgments ourselves. Now, I think it's kind of the same thing that went on with the growth of these philosophers originally. So we came to this point where we began to understand, hey, when it thunders, it's just going to rain. But we're not going to get killed when it thunders and rains, except for occasionally when we're standing where the lightning strikes, and the chances are that that's not going to happen. And some of the guys stood back and went, and then they noticed the fire, and they said, oh, well, you can take this fire on a torch and carry it over here, and you can keep these guys keeping it going, and then you have fire whenever you want it. And the guys stood back and said, And that was when the philosophers started thinking, and started to think, well, geez, we have a certain degree of control, of free will over this. So it must not be that all of this stuff is just there, or that it comes from God. The truth must be that it came from somewhere else, hence the beginning of the search for truth. Now, what's the difference between that and reality? That, if you know the answer to that question, you're going to make a lot of money. I certainly don't have any idea what the answer to that question is, but the two are interrelated, that's for sure. It's my opinion that truth becomes more evident the more I have been exposed to my reality and my participation in that reality. But as an oversimplification, you remember when I was reading from this metaphysics that there's a part of philosophy that would like to insist that everything is reduced to just one basis. That would be truth, if it were true. But philosophy, to my knowledge, has not been able to reduce anything to one basis. Scientists are still trying.
Let me answer your question. You said at the beginning that reality is conception. So would truth just be whatever you conceive of truth?
Absolutely. I would agree with that. Now here again, it's real easy to run into problems with laws and society because we have to have boundaries, And so, you may say it's the truth that you can't go out and murder somebody because our society dictates that you can't do that. But you and I know that the truth is that you can go out and murder somebody. After the fact, you will be punished for it, but in fact, you can do that. So, see, it all starts to get messed up again in the culture in which we were raised and the society in which we live. And we have to stay within certain confines of that. But there were large segments of that in my life that were very uncomfortable for me, and I didn't know that I had a choice. And what I've started to find out now is that there is, first of all, my own personal reality, my own personal truth within limitations, and that I can peacefully coexist in this life with the dictates of my reality as I understand it today, our society's rules and regulations as I understand them today.
What about if you shouldn't go out and murder someone?
That's a real good question. And again, that's very much influenced by the way culture came up. Coming back to that religion of that Satanistic killing that I mentioned a few minutes ago, there's an example of the difference in morality between religions. Obviously, satanic worship would have you believe that making a human sacrifice is the right and moral thing to do. See? So it's influenced by all those different sorts of things. If you have never been in an argument with someone Islamic, you should try it sometime. It is absolutely fascinating. with so many things they believe. I mean, we're like, when I say them and us, I'm talking about the Islamic approach as opposed to the Judeo-Christian approach. We are like ships passing in the night, you know? And morale, geez, you can come up with lots of examples, you know?
Could you provide a couple, just
beg
out of
pardon?
curiosity, could you provide
I
a couple?
can give you a real good one.
Okay.
In many areas of Africa and in certain sects of Islam, it is their practice to perform on females genital mutilation. I could get real graphic with this example, okay? But it's just, to my way of thinking, to our collective way of thinking, it's absolutely gross. Now, they have been doing that for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and they have what they call very good reasons for doing that. And at some point along the line, the women who submit to this came to believe that this is reality for them, that this is what they're supposed to do, that they are morally obligated to do this. And there are lots of other examples too. You know, some of them are religious and ritualistic, and others are not. Why, just the very social hierarchy of women in that part of the world is another really good example. I mean, over there you can't even call women second-class citizens. They don't rank that high. And not just in the United States, but in the West in general, we don't subscribe to that. There are times when we were perhaps closer to it than we are now, but we have never really fully subscribed to it, you know? Women in those cultures are chattels. They are property. There was a time not too distant when children in this society, in this agrarian society out in farms and whatnot, were considered property. And that's why your farm families had so many children. I mean, you know, they were assets. And of course, you know, we can go back and talk about slavery and all that sort of thing too, but it all comes back to the same thing. Anyway, getting back to language just a minute, there's a couple of things I wanted to read out of here about language that I think are real interesting. Language is the road to God, but words are the tools of the devil. The map is not the territory. Terms may be used, but none of them are absolute. Don't bite my finger, look where I'm pointing. That comes from Harold Reingold, who wrote this book. They have a word for it. And here's what Dr. Zier says about this. This is really interesting. Words aren't neutral. They have power to shape your experience. Often a single word describes both a concrete thing and an abstract one. Words and ideas are maps that represent reality as best they can. Wow. Words and ideas are maps that represent reality as best they can. They're symbols that we use for our reality. Sometimes the correspondence between the map and the landscape is very exact. Sometimes it is very distorted and misleading. Sometimes it is a good description of one aspect of the landscape, but not of other aspects. People have to learn how to see and think about ideas that aren't concrete. That learning rarely kicks in before our early 20s, and then only if we've had enough proddings to notice that things are not exactly how they seemed before. Many adults never learn how this difference works. They may go through life passionately defending a map when they think they're standing up for obvious, concrete reality. And all in the world that that's saying is that you can be taught a word or a tradition or a custom in your life and your culture all your life, and you may go through life defending it as the absolute truth and the absolute reality, when in fact for you it is not. And language is the catalyst that moves this stuff back and forth between us. One of the key functions of the brain is to filter and limit input, because there's always more going on around us than a human brain can keep track of. We ignore information and lump things together where differences don't seem important to us, and we learn more exact words for the things we want to know more about. This is interesting. Eskimo language has dozens of words for ice, not for snow, because they need to be very expert about the fine differences in ice to make their living. If we don't know enough of the right words, we don't have the perceptual tools to notice and remember details in the first place, or we try to use the words we have and force experience into the categories we expect to see. For instance, how many specific names for colors you know helps govern how well you can discriminate and remember color samples. For example, a few primitive languages have only a single word for blue-green or for red-yellow, and native speakers of those languages can't see differences in hue that are obvious to Westerners. Isn't that something? The only difference in those colors is the words we use for it. Reality. So, back to the guy who's colorblind, it's not in his reality if he can't see the color of Joe's shirt. And incidentally, that little blurb about Connie, about you're thinking not kicking into your 20, ought to have you out at the university next week.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
This goes on and on. It's a wonderful paper. This is a brilliant woman, and all this stuff is designed to do is to make you think. That's all. I never thought about this stuff when I was in the pursuit of material gain. I never thought about this stuff when I was completely and totally self-centered and wrapped up in my own stuff and what's going to happen to me today and what am I going to gain and what am I going to lose today. Anybody got another comment? A little comment.
I'm not sure Don, this has a relationship to the reality truth thing. I read this in some AA literature, matter of fact, not too long ago. Two priests came across a young woman who needed to ford the stream and was very leery of getting across. The two priests knew from their vows that really they were celibate, they would touch women. The one priest picked the young lady up, forded the stream with her, put her down on the other side, and they went on, the two priests went on their way, and the other fellow was, he didn't do the carrying, he was very silent. After about 5 or 6 hours, he jumped the other priest about picking this woman up, holding her and carrying her across, and alluded to, if not directly, made the implications of the first priest's feelings about this. And the first priest, the priest who carried the gal across, said, well, I held this woman for, 2 or 3 minutes. You've held her for the last 6 hours. The reality of the thing was that he did carry her across. The reality of the other fellow was he saw something. The truth of the whole thing only remained in the hearts and minds of the two different men. The truth was a different thing to both of them, probably. Although the second guy may have thought later on, yeah, I probably shouldn't accuse Charlie of sensuous thoughts. But, you know, in the other guy's mind, the truth of it was only in his heart and mind. Was he aroused by this? Did he have than just kindness and to help the other person or not. I thought that was quite interesting.
It's just a beautiful example of what we're talking about. So, having heard that and some of this other stuff, what are you going to say when somebody says, what is reality? Or, more importantly, and perhaps less general, when somebody sees a situation and says, that's not real, that's not reality, says that to you. Well, if you're trying to answer the question, what is reality? It seems to me, since we've been talking about this language and these cultures and everything, it's impossible to answer what reality is until you know all about all these languages and all these cultures. See? So it's impossible. No one mind can absorb all of that. So consequently, it all comes back to that thing again, that reality is a very individual thing. Yeah, Gerald?
I think another part of it is motivation for reality. When I ran across a model one time, this guy was talking to me about that part of it comes down to wanting to be accepted in a particular culture or a society or love, if you want to use that word. And in a particular society or culture, there are some rules. You should do this, you've got to do this, you have to do this, that sort of thing. And because the rule is inexact, that there's always a tendency to feel angry and depressed when you're trying to follow somebody else's guidelines. And then, but if you don't follow those, you tend to end up feeling guilty and shameful. And that part of the reality of self-acceptance is sort of a frame thing from that. Meaning, if there's an acceptance of basic and intrinsic worth, that I'm of value whether other people accept me or not, then I get off this wheel about live up to somebody else's expectations. And then it gets down to more free choice and choosing.
Boy, you said a mouthful there, in my opinion. What do you do when you don't know what to do? Like you say, you have choices. Absolutely, you have choices. But for a scared person like me, all my life I was scared. I couldn't tell you what the hell I was scared of, but it was going to happen. I have a name for that. I call it the Chicken Little syndrome. You remember Chicken Little? The sky is falling. The sky is falling. That was me. Everywhere I went, the sky was falling. Or that guy from the Munsters who runs around, always has the rain cloud over his head that's always raining wherever he goes. You know, that sort of thing. What do you do if you just don't know? And as far as I can tell, the only answer to that is to try on some of these things. We were talking about this last night. Make some mistakes until you find out what is right and what isn't right. And you know, young people can't do that very well. Younger people can. There are exceptions, of course, but that tends to have been my experience. Now this leads to, interestingly enough, Gerald, what I was going to bring up as the next point, and you really made a nice, smooth entry into that. And that is, we've been talking about how this stuff has grown up and stacked up, era on era, and generation on generation, and Socrates and Aristotle, and materialism and Karl Marx and whatnot. So where are we now as far as this is concerned? This is a really fascinating little book called Reality Isn't What It Used to Be. This is a new book, incidentally. I just want to read you the flyleaf to give you an idea of what this is about, because this is right up to date. It says here, the author's subject matter is nothing less than the social construction, the social construction of reality. How traditional societies created and maintained their ideas about the world. How postmodern artists, and that's the buzzword for today, postmodern. Everything is becoming postmodern. He'll tell us what that is in just a second. How postmodern artists and scholars and scientists are exposing the workings of the reality-creating machinery at the same time that new values and beliefs are being created on all sides. And if that sounds confusing to you, it's because it is. If there is anything we have plenty of, writes the author, it is belief systems. But we also have something else, a growing suspicion that all belief systems, all ideas about human reality are social constructions. Isn't this what we've been saying? This is a story about stories, a belief about beliefs, and in time, probably a very short time, it will become a central part of the worldwide view of most people. In examining the explosive birth of this view, of this new world, the author touches on such subjects as the packaging of Ronald Reagan, our first postmodern president, the predicament of the Pope, the last of the monarchs, and the perils of Salman Rushdie, not only irreverent towards the prophet, but irreverent toward modern reality. He also reveals a new kind of political conflict that becomes an increasingly troublesome feature of the postmodern era. Here it is. Not the conflict between beliefs that we have known in the past, but a conflict between beliefs about belief that pits old-fashioned Marxists against socialist experimenters, fundamentalist Christians against liberal churchgoers, fact-happy scientists against explorers of inner and outer space. Although unrelenting in this depiction of a world in which ancient and not so ancient systems of eternal truth lie in ruins everywhere around us, the author offers an essentially hopeful view of the great possibilities of freedom and conviviality that are opening up to the tumultuous final decade of the 20th century. If this is the world we now live in, he declares, let us make the most of it. Well, what he's talking about in this postmodern era is that we have grown to this point where there are this large conglomeration of beliefs, cultures, morals, and approaches to society. And in the postmodern era, there is a tremendous pressure to belong or conform to one of them. Now, it's not the kind of pressure that there was in previous eras where the pressure was to belong to one of them. Whether it was Genghis Khan and the Mongol hordes coming across your place and saying you're going to believe our way, or whether it was the Inquisition saying you're going to believe our way, or more recently the Axis fascist movements of Nazi Germany and fascist Spain and Italy, you're going to believe our way. The renegades are the ones who are outside of any of this. The ones who are sitting around doing their own thing, going, And the disturbing news to me about that is, for those of you all who are like me, a sick but recovering alcoholic, that's where we fit in, I think. Is we're out here on the side going, or more recently, When I was fairly new in the program, I heard the expression earth person, and some of you all may have heard that, an earth person. And so I asked my sponsor, I said, Charlie, what's an earth person? What does that mean? And he said, he looked at me and he said, as he always does in his infinite wisdom, he said, will you just stick around and listen? and you'll learn what it means. Well, today, I know what an earth person means. But I can't really tell you. As my mother would say, it doesn't quite translate. Let me describe it to you this way. I'm a computer nut, and I do everything on my computer. And one of the things you can do with a computer is you can have a little thing called a startup screen. So when you turn your computer on and the light comes up in the monitor, you can have a picture come on right first of your own choosing. You can make some clip art or you can draw it yourself. Okay? I have a computer-drawn picture of the Earth as seen from the moon. You know what that looks like. You know, Neil Armstrong looking back over his shoulder. And I put that in the right-hand corner, the left-hand corner of my startup screen. And then I took my little mouse and I clipped little stars all over the black sky of space that's all around the world. And then in reverse type, white against the black sky, I typed in a serenity prayer. So when my computer screen comes up, here's the Earth and all these stars, and in the middle of it, it says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And that picture sits there while the basic startup systems of my computer are loaded into its central processing unit and get ready for me to work with. And while I'm sitting there watching that, I have the distinct feeling that I am floating out there in those stars, looking at the world, see? And out here with me, floating around, is the serenity prayer, which I really understand and I really love. And the people who don't understand what I just said are standing back on Earth, knee-deep in shit, and those are the Earth people. You got a word for that? That's kind of what Earth people are, you know? Yeah, some of you all may think that's crazy, and that's okay with me, because I never denied that I was crazy. Never did. Never told you all I wasn't crazy. But that's very real to me. It really is. You know, when I see somebody really suffering because they don't understand what I understand today about recovery, that is a painful part of my reality. And it gets real painful when I try to tell them, or I try to show them, or I try to jump in there and do their problem for them so that they won't have it. And it doesn't work, you know? And that's my reality. And I try to explain that to somebody who hasn't been exposed to all of this that we have, and they look at me like I'm crazy. There's a lot of people who think I'm crazy. And that's okay. That's okay. Just a little bit more, and then we'll be done. I gave you a couple of other sheets. I want to talk just a couple of minutes about William James and Carl Jung, because out of all of this mishmash that I have just thrown you, out of all of this stuff, it turns out, am I out of time? It turns out that out of all of this stuff, all these philosophers and philosophies, and science this, and truth that, and reality this and that, it turns out that as I have dabbled in some of this stuff, I have started to find the reality that I am comfortable with. And what I want to say to you all today is that just a little bit of it that I've got feels so good that my wish for you would be that you would teach teach yourself enough to recognize it, to no matter how you get into it, whether you fall into it, whether you strive for it and reach for it, or whether you just happen to step into it one day, that you will start to realize and reason and explore and not accept as the real reality, the truth, not accept as the truth whatever you've been thinking all along. Well, there are a couple of very important people who started this train of thought. One of them started it around the turn of the century, and the other one carried it up into the modern era. Not the postmodern era, but the modern era. The one who explained it so very well was William James. William James wrote many, many things, but one of his greatest works is a book that's extremely hard to read called The Varieties of Religious Experience. And this work became a major basis for the Oxford movement. And the Oxford movement became a major foundation for Alcoholics Anonymous. So, while it is true that Bill Wilson and his group of cronies wrote the big book, and while it is true that Bill reclined back in bed one night and wrote the 12 steps, reclining in bed one night, which I find absolutely fantastically unbelievable, the fact of the matter is that Bill Wilson was a student. Number one, was susceptible to, and number two, was a student of the Oxford movement, which had its foundations in William James, and William James got it from somewhere before that. Okay? And here's what that's about. James professed that consciousness functions in an active, purposeful way to relate and organize thoughts, giving them a streamlike continuity. And that means, folks, that if you get an idea in your brain and it gets implanted there, we are going to tend to organize everything and anything else around us that happens from that point on in context with that thought, idea, moral, or whatever that we've implanted in our brain, and it's going to flow in a streamlike continuity. So if you decide that it's all right to perform female genital mutilation, and that's embedded, everything flows from that and builds from that, and it stacks higher and higher and higher. This is William James's philosophy of truth. James considered philosophies to be expressions of personal temperament and developed a correlation between tough-minded and tender-minded temperaments, and empiricist and rationalistic positions in philosophy. Theories, he felt, are instruments that humans use to solve problems and should be judged in terms of their cash value or practical consequences for human conduct. He just gave us permission, right there, to choose whatever we want as our reality, within the confines of the laws of the society we live in. Theories, he felt, theories. Anything that any of these philosophers said is a theory, okay? Theories are instruments that humans use to solve problems and should be judged in terms of their cash value. How well does this theory work for you? If it doesn't work, don't use it. Or practical consequences for human conduct. He developed the notion of truth as a leading that is useful. It can change as human experience changes. The morality, as well as the truth of an idea or action, should be judged, according to James, in a similar way, in terms of its outcome in human experience. If female genital mutilation works for you, go for it. It's very hard for us to to understand and swallow. In The Will to Believe and the Varieties of Religious Experience, which was written in 1902, James examined the problem of belief in cases in which no immediate evidence exists on which to base one's belief. He concluded that in the area of religious commitment, belief can create its own truth through the effects created in the experience of the believer by his willing nature. And boy, if that doesn't explain what happened to me when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't know what does. Belief in God is thus pragmatically justified if it makes a positive difference in the experience of the believer. If God works for you, do it. If God works for you, it's your reality. And likewise, if it doesn't, it's not your reality. There is no fixed external world to be discovered by our minds, but instead, I love this, a humming, buzzing confusion that we organize through experience. So you see, y'all, William James said it. What the truth and reality is that everybody's out there going, It's terrific. Standing on that came my hero, Carl Jung. And it takes a long time, maybe the rest of my life, to understand Jung. But I have spent some time with it. This is an oversimplification of Jung. Now we have progressed, you see. We've taken this path of the individualist pragmatists that James started, and we've progressed now to Jung, who brought it into the modern era. He brought it up into the 1960s and was not responsible for what happened in the 1960s. Jung felt he possessed, man possessed, humans possessed, two separate personalities. An outer public self that was involved in the world and with his family and peers, and a secret inner self that felt a special closeness to God. Oh, ain't that good? Isn't that the truth? Isn't that reality? The way you and I understand it. The interplay between these selves, the outer self and the secret inner self, formed a central theme of Jung's personal life and contributed to his later emphasis on the individual's striving for integration and wholeness. And so what Dr. Jung thought we should strive for is to take this outer self, family, peers, society, and this inner self with which we connect with God, and bring them as close together and integrate them as much with each other as we can possibly learn to do. And the result that you get when you do that is you are whole. And that's what the goal is to come to wholeness. And Clint told us last night that what wholeness is not, which comes from the Latin, is insane. It's a lack of sanity. And being sane is to be whole. Okay. Jung viewed symbol creation as central to understanding human nature. And that's something we didn't touch on, but symbols, which is another big area in all of these philosophies, symbols pick up where words leave off. So if the guy is trying to, if I'm trying to explain to you what a bagel is, and there's not a word for it other than bagel, and you can't understand bagel, then I'll hold up a donut, which is a symbol, to show you what it's shaped like. And I'll pull a piece of the donut off, and I'll go, no, because it's not that soft, and then I'll fry a piece off to show you that a bagel is shaped like this, but it's stiffer, it's tougher, you know? Symbols. That they pick up where words leave off. And they're a very big part of our reality. You're looking at all kinds of symbols around here today. and they speak to you without words, which makes them extremely powerful, and they are a part of your reality as you receive them. Jung viewed symbol creation as central to understanding human nature, and he explored the correspondences between symbols arising from the life struggles of individuals and the symbolic images underlying religious, mythological, and magical systems of many cultural areas. And there he's talking about all this stuff that the spiritual American Indians do when they worship this mountain or that. Jung was taken with the American Indians, and he corresponded at great length with many of the chiefs, because the chiefs could not put into words what it was in their culture about their connection with God and earth, which are almost the same. But they understood each other. And Jung had experienced that in his inner self, in his inner life. Well, he says that there are two kinds of experience. One is the personal experience, and those are the things that happen to us in our personal life and how we receive them and what they're based on. But the other one tends to be that pool of instinct that we were talking about earlier when we talked about where animals get the urge to reproduce, mate and reproduce at a specific time. They don't have any control over it, it's instinct. Well, something like instinct, according to Dr. Jung, exists for humans, and it's called the collective unconscious. And it's this big pool of humanity from which some of our personality and psyche springs to us. It's things we innately know, whether we were taught them by our experiences or not. He refers to them as feeling the need for parents. That is a basic instinct, the need for parents. He's got some more of them in here, and for some reason I went blank for some reason. There are archetypes, which is what these instincts are called, corresponding to situations such as having parents, finding a mate, having children, and confronting death. And highly elaborated derivatives of these archetypes populate all the great mythological and religious systems of the world. And they've always been there. Dr. Jung uncovered them in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, but they've always been there. One last thing about Dr. Jung. This is my favorite thing that he said. That doesn't mean that I've been exposed to everything he said. This is my favorite thing that he said that I've seen and heard so far. And this means a lot to me. We talked about this in my Jungian encounter group. Dr. Jung said he compared our lives to a house with many rooms in it. And he said most people spend most of their life in the parlor that's up at the front. When you walk in the front doorway, it's the room immediately to your right. The dining room is across the hall, okay? The parlor. Most of us spend all of our lives in the parlor. But those of us who discover some of the great reality have the courage and the mystery to get up, walk out of the parlor into the hall, make a right turn, walk down the hall to the next room, open the door, look in, and turn on the light. You can't do anything about how many rooms there are in the house. You can't do anything about how the house is laid out and situated. But you can go and experience the other rooms that exist. And to me, that's what the search for reality is. Reality is not just what my parents.
You want me to go stand up there so you're sure you got it just right?
Would you want to be on film?
No.
We can arrange that.
No, I don't care to, thank you.
I don't want to be on the film, so that's, yeah, I know what you
Well,
mean.
tell me when you want me to cut it off.
Just so I'll feel better, let's start in the usual manner with a moment of pure silence and a serenity prayer, if you would like to join in. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, that worked. Makes me feel better. Well, did anybody change their conception of reality? Probably not. But those things die hard. I know that Cynthia has something she wants to talk about, and I hope a lot more of you do too. Before we start though, I wanted to read you just a few of these 81 ways, according to Steve Allen, 81 ways to make Americans think smarter. This book has been out for a while. Let's see when he wrote this. Boy, has he written a lot of books. This is copyright 1989. It's newer than I thought it was. 1989, so it is. It's newer than I thought. Here's just some things to think about. Some of these are a little slow getting started, but they kind of flow. You know, like some of that stuff we were talking about this afternoon. And he writes a couple of 3 pages on each one, and I am just going to read you the rules, understanding that, you know, he explains this, each one of them. Number 1, decide that in the future you will reason more effectively. Do some casual studying about the brain, the mind, memory, and the whole field of psychology. We did a little bit of that this morning. Beware of rushing to judgment. Beware of falling in love with your first answer. Beware of erroneous assumption. Beware of making predictions on the strength of insufficient evidence. Examine your superstitions. Boy, that can get really interesting. Recognize that you have personal prejudices. That's the first thing that they try to teach us in social work, is to become aware of where we are coming from. Like we said this morning, anything that you say has to come through this filtering system that sits on top of my neck, and it comes with its own set of prejudices. And if you're aware of them, you can make allowances for them and be more understanding that way. Beware of prefabricated answers. Look before you leave. He who hesitates is lost. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. It's never too late to learn. Where there's a will, there's a way. Time and tide wait for no man, and etc. Ad nauseum. Better safe than sorry. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Beware of arguments by slogans or epigrams, which is essentially what we were just pointing out there. Be aware that your opinions, assumptions, and beliefs are often affected by your peer pressure group. Ain't that the truth? Do not make an exclusive commitment to either optimism or pessimism. Beware of giving children only factual answers. Kind of reminds me of that saying around the AA program, you have to become childlike to get this deal, you know? And, you know, speaking of concrete factual answers to kids is about, it's trying to rob them of their childlikeness, for the want of a better word. Beware of thinking that because you are bright and quick-minded, you therefore reason well. Which reminds me of a story. This is one of my favorites, because I spent a year working with the chronically mentally ill, and that's a real trip. They are really strange. And we had an AA meeting for chronically mentally ill people at the clinic that I worked